10 years ago, in his modest apartment, he gazed intently at his wedding suit, impeccably pressed and awaiting its moment in the closet. In 6 days, the grand ceremony was to take place at Riverstone Hall, a venue considered a gem of Chicago. Lily Hartman, his chosen bride, had insisted on this location, its pristine white stone walls, sparkling chandeliers, and a terrace with breathtaking lake views. Such places were typically only accessible to those with significant financial resources, which, unfortunately, he did not possess. Nevertheless, he had a promising job, a stable income, and an unwavering belief that their love could overcome any obstacle. However, that week, everything went wrong, as if an evil fate pursued him. It began on Wednesday morning when his boss summoned him. The CEO's office was minimalist, with only one folder on the desk. Without delay, the boss announced, "Ethan, the investors are pulling out. We're forced to close half the company." "I'm very sorry, but your position is being eliminated, effective today." These words hit him like a lightning bolt. The wedding was just days away. Leaving the building with a box of personal belongings, he pondered how to break the news to Lily. They had always considered themselves a team, and he hoped she would view this as a temporary setback. That evening, he called her. "Hi," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Something unpleasant happened today. The company lost its funding, and I was laid off, but I'm confident I'll find something new quickly. I already have some plans." A long pause followed, then her voice sounded even and slightly uncertain. "My dad thinks this changes everything." His stomach clenched with a bad premonition. "Lily, it's just a job. I'll find another. We're still together, aren't we?" She didn't argue, but she didn't reassure him either. The next day, she suggested dinner with her parents. That dinner felt like a court hearing where the verdict had already been decided. Richard Hartman presided at the head of the long table, a glass of whiskey in hand. His wife, Eleanor, kept her gaze downcast. Lily sat beside her, silent. Richard immediately got to the point. "Ethan, I'll be blunt. You're a sinking ship. My daughter will not marry a man who cannot provide her with a decent life." He gritted his teeth. "It's not about money, it's about love. We'll get through everything together, like any other couple." Richard sneered. "Love is for songs and movies. In real life, security and stability matter. You've lost both." He looked at Lily, trying to find in her eyes the woman who had once promised him forever, but she avoided his gaze. 2 days later, she broke off the engagement. She didn't even have the courage to do it in person. Her mother came to his apartment with a small velvet box and said, "Lily wanted you to return this." The engagement ring lay inside, cold and lifeless. The venue booking was canceled. His mother, Grace, called him in tears, having heard the sad news from a mutual acquaintance. His younger brother, Ben, appeared at his doorstep with a 6-pack of beer and said, "They're wrong about you, bro. You'll show them what you're worth." He convinced himself he could move on. But deep down, he knew the humiliation would stay with him forever. It wasn't just that Lily left. It was how her family made him feel worthless, as if his value was measured only by his salary. For years, their words haunted him whenever he stayed late at work, took a risk, or faced difficulties. And those words resurfaced last month when he signed the final documents for the acquisition of a mid-sized technology firm. This deal brought an unexpected bonus, full control over Hartman Manufacturing, Richard's company. He could have simply savored the victory in silence, but he didn't. Instead, he rented Riverstone Hall, the same chandeliers, the same white stone walls, the same terrace that was supposed to be the backdrop for their wedding vows. But this time, it was a celebration of the largest acquisition in his company's history. He made sure the guest list included all the most prominent names in the city's business circles, and 3 names in particular: Richard Hartman, Eleanor Hartman, and Lily Hartman. The invitations were sent in embossed gold envelopes. On the back, in small black letters, it was printed, "Organized by Ethan Cole." He knew this moment would come sooner or later. People like the Hartmans never missed an opportunity to display their presence where power resided. That very evening, in the heart of Riverstone Hall, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, he waited with palpable tension for their appearance through those monumental glass doors. And when they finally entered, The mere expression on Richard's face spoke volumes. Clearly, he hadn't expected to see him there. The 10 years separating him from that evening at Riverstone Hall represented a completely different chapter of his life. At 29, he lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Chicago's West Loop. The rent was substantial, but his job as a project manager at a promising tech startup provided him with a decent living. They were developing a cybersecurity platform that had just secured a promising contract. He was convinced they were on the verge of something big. His days began early. He'd grab coffee at the nearest cafe, take the train downtown, and spend 10 to 12 hours at work, believing every effort mattered. On Fridays, he invariably met Lily at a small Italian restaurant she loved. She would enthusiastically discuss the details of their upcoming wedding, and he would listen attentively, trying to feign understanding of the difference between chiffon and organza. Lily Hartman possessed that rare charisma that commanded attention the moment she entered a room. She exuded an exquisite, effortless grace, and always looked as if she had just stepped off the pages of a fashion magazine. Smart, with an MBA, she worked in marketing for a prestigious luxury brand. Her self-confidence was one of the first traits that attracted him. They had met 3 years prior at a business event. She was animatedly chatting with a group of people, smiling as she admitted she understood barely half the technical jargon they were exchanging. He introduced himself, joked that they probably wouldn't need complex encryption for dinner conversation, and they had been inseparable ever since. Their backgrounds were strikingly different. His mother, Grace, raised him after his father died when he was just 13. She worked as a school librarian and instilled in him that hard work and honesty were life's most important qualities. His younger brother, Ben, grew up helping repair cars in their uncle's garage and eventually became an auto mechanic. They didn't have much, but their home was always filled with warmth, humor, and an unwavering sense of loyalty. Lily, in contrast, grew up in a sprawling estate in an affluent suburb. Her father, Richard Hartman, owned one of the most successful manufacturing companies in the city. He was the kind of man who judged others by their financial status and potential benefit. From the start, he made it clear he didn't consider Ethan a worthy match for his daughter. His wife, Eleanor, was more reserved but kept her distance, as if expecting the romance to end soon. Nevertheless, Lily continued to insist her family would eventually accept him. "Once they see how happy we are, they'll understand," she told him repeatedly. He genuinely wanted to believe her. When they announced their engagement, he saw it as proof that love could overcome any obstacle. He had saved for months to buy her the ring. It wasn't as extravagant as those sparkling on her friend's fingers on social media, but it was elegant and chosen with special care. When he proposed to her in the park, where they had first walked together, she said yes through tears of joy. The months leading up to the wedding flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Lily had a folder filled with fabric swatches and seating charts. He was responsible for arranging the band and photographer. His mother was over the moon, telling everyone that her son was marrying a real catch. Ben teased him, asking if he planned to cry during the vows. Riverstone Hall was Lily's cherished dream. She excitedly showed him photos of its grand staircase, the Lakeview terrace, and the sparkling crystal chandeliers. It was far more expensive than he could afford, but she assured him her parents would cover all costs. He disliked the idea of accepting money from them, but he decided not to argue. She was so excited, and he wanted her to have the day she dreamed of. A week before everything fell apart, they visited Riverstone Hall together for a menu tasting. He remembered the sunlight flooding the marble floors and the delightful aroma of roasted herbs wafting from the kitchen. His mother sat beside him, as if mentally taking notes for the rest of her life. Ben teased him, asking if he would cry during the vows. At one point, Lily leaned in and whispered, "In 10 years, we'll laugh about how stressed we were over table decorations." He chuckled and replied, "As long as you're by my side, I'll laugh about anything." That was the last truly carefree moment he remembered sharing with her. Looking back, he realized the cracks in their relationship had already begun to show. Richard had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. He constantly spoke of the tech industry's instability, but Ethan brushed off these concerns, believing Lily's father was just overprotective. He didn't yet realize how much Richard valued control and how easily Lily succumbed to his influence. At that moment, he still believed the only danger they faced was the difficulties they would confront together. He couldn't have imagined that what would break them was something he would have to face alone. On Wednesday morning, a day seemingly no different from any other, news broke that turned everything upside down. Ethan, as usual, was on the train downtown, coffee in hand, preparing for another day of work. Mid-morning, while he was participating in a meeting about an upcoming product update, the CEO unexpectedly called him out of the room. The executive's face was pale, and an ominous silence hung in the corridor. "Ethan," he began, avoiding eye contact, "we've lost our primary investor. The deal fell through. We're forced to cut half the team. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated." The words struck like a bolt from the blue. The wedding was just 6 days away. Ethan's entire life was built around a stable job and reliable income, and suddenly everything collapsed in an instant. He silently gathered his belongings, feeling the sympathetic glances of colleagues who understood that tomorrow any of them could be in his place. On the train ride home, his mind frantically crunched numbers, savings, bills, honeymoon cost. He convinced himself he could still fix everything. He had skills, connections, and a solid resume. He would quickly find a new job. That evening, Ethan called Lily. "Something happened today," he said. "The company lost its funding and I was laid off, but I'm already setting up interviews. It won't be for long." A long pause hung in the air. "My dad says this changes everything," she finally said. "It's just a job," Ethan replied. "We'll get through it together." There was no response, and that silence spoke louder than any words. The next day, Lily invited Ethan to dinner at her parents' house. He hoped for support and comfort, but instead, he walked into an ambush. The dining room in the Hartman home was as imposing as its owner, a long mahogany table, glittering silverware beneath a chandelier. Richard Hartman sat at the head of the table, a glass of whiskey in hand. Eleanor sat silently beside him, her posture impeccable, her face inscrutable. Lily sat opposite Ethan, her eyes downcast. Richard didn't mince words. "Ethan, I'll be blunt. You're a sinking ship. My daughter will not marry a man who cannot provide her with a decent life." Ethan met his gaze. "It's not about money. It's about love. We planned a future together, and nothing has changed." Richard sneered, as if before a naive child. "Love is a luxury. Stability is a necessity, and you've just lost it." Ethan turned to Lily. Tell him it doesn't matter." Her voice was barely audible. "I don't know, Ethan. Maybe we should wait until things settle down." The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Ethan left feeling he had been judged, found guilty, and sentenced in less than an hour. 2 days later, the answer arrived. Not from Lily, but from her mother. Eleanor appeared at Ethan's apartment door with a velvet box containing the ring he had given Lily. "She asked me to return this," she said softly. "It's for the best." Ethan stood in the doorway, holding the box, cold and heavy in his hand. The wedding was canceled. Riverstone Hall was canceled. His phone buzzed with sympathetic messages from friends who had heard the news, each one a reminder of how public his humiliation had become. His mother called as soon as she found out. "You're coming to our place for dinner tonight," she said. "We'll get through this." There were tears in her voice, and Ethan knew she was holding back anger for his sake. Ben arrived with a 6-pack of beer. "They're wrong about you," he said. "One day, you'll show them what they lost." For the first few weeks, Ethan felt as if he were in a fog. He woke up in the middle of the night, replaying his last conversation with Lily, trying to understand when she decided he wasn't worth the risk. He wondered if she had ever truly believed in their love, or if she was just waiting for an excuse to leave. Worst of all was the echo of Richard's words, "sinking ship." They rang in his ears every time Ethan checked his dwindling bank account or browsed job postings with salaries half of what he used to earn. The embarrassment followed him everywhere. Friends tried to set him up with new people, but he wasn't ready. He avoided certain areas of the city to prevent running into Lily or her family. He took odd jobs to pay the bills while searching for a way back into the tech industry. The breakup shattered not only his relationship, but also his sense of stability. But beneath all that pain, something new began to grow, a determination he hadn't felt before. If Richard thought he was a sinking ship, Ethan was going to prove he was an entire fleet. This thought became the spark he carried with him into every job application, every freelance project, every long night dedicated to learning new programming languages. He was no longer just trying to survive. He was building something greater than he ever could have imagined. The weeks following the canceled wedding were perhaps the darkest period in Ethan's life. Mornings greeted him with a suffocating silence that bound his movements and thoughts. In the closet, like a silent reproach, hung the ill-fated suit meant for the celebration at Riverstone Hall. Ethan couldn't bring himself to put it away. Each time he opened the door, he confronted the ghost of lost hopes. Initially, Ethan took any job to make ends meet. Data entry at a temp agency, modest IT support at a local community center, occasional website fixes for entrepreneurial friends. The income was meager, but allowed him to stay afloat. His mother, concerned about his situation, finally broke down during dinner one evening. "Ethan, you can't live on scraps forever. You deserve more." Ben, Ethan's friend, found his own way to cheer him up. One day, while tinkering with his beat-up pickup truck in the garage, he said, without looking up from the engine, "Want to prove them wrong? Then stop living like you've already lost. They think you're a sinking ship. Build yourself a whole fleet." These words seemed to flip a switch inside Ethan. He had been drifting, passively reacting to fate's blows, instead of actively charting his own course. If he wanted a future not dependent on the Hartman's opinion, he had to create it himself. The following Monday, Ethan walked into a small computer repair shop nearby and inquired if they needed staff. The owner, a man named Jeff, said he needed someone to handle coding tasks he didn't have time for. The pay was low, but Ethan accepted, treating every project as if it were worth 10 times more. At night, Ethan avidly studied new programming languages: Python, JavaScript, SQL. He took online cybersecurity courses, devoured business literature, and kept in touch with old acquaintances, letting them know he was available for freelance work. Gradually, he built a small client base. It wasn't until 2 years later that Ethan felt things shifting. He was no longer just struggling to survive. Now he was choosing projects, setting prices that matched his time and expertise. One such project evolved into a partnership. A client, the owner of a logistics firm, proposed that Ethan collaborate on developing a security platform. Initially, they worked out of the client's basement, splitting profits. But within a year, their platform attracted attention from other companies. Thus, Cole and Vance Technologies was born. It was a small firm, just 2 people, but they had an in-demand product. Ethan handled development and client acquisition, while his partner focused on operational management. They reinvested every dollar earned into growth. There were weeks when Ethan barely slept, fueled only by coffee and determination, but he felt himself gaining momentum. By the 5th year, they had a team of 12 and contracts with several mid-sized companies. Ethan began to be invited to industry conferences not just as an attendee, but as a speaker. His name became increasingly recognized in the cybersecurity field. He didn't dwell on his past, but secretly, he was keeping score. Every new client, every new employee, every profitable quarter was another point earned in his silent competition against the Hartmans. And then came the opportunity that changed everything. A major tech corporation, Titansoft, was looking to expand its security division. They approached Cole and Vance Technologies with an acquisition offer that would allow Ethan to remain at the head of the division with full creative freedom. This was about money he had never dreamed of earning and access to resources that could take their developments to an entirely new level. Ethan accepted. After 2 years at Titansoft, Ethan was tasked with leading negotiations for a strategic acquisition. The target was a troubled manufacturing company that possessed valuable patents but suffered from inefficient management. The company's name in the briefing made Ethan freeze: Hartman Manufacturing, Richard's company. He delved into the details. It turned out that many years ago, the company had been acquired by another mid-sized tech firm. But now, that firm was part of Titansoft, meaning that if the deal went through, Ethan would have the final say regarding the future of Hartman Manufacturing. He took his time, wanting to do everything correctly. The acquisition involved several months of intense negotiations, but when all signatures were in place, the deal closed. Ethan now controlled the company on which Richard had built his reputation. Ethan Cole stood on the threshold of triumph, having acquired the company that once defined Richard Hartman's career. The temptation to keep it private, to savor a personal victory, was strong. But the memory of that evening in the Hartman dining room, Richard's self-assured tone as he called Ethan a sinking ship, resurfaced. He also recalled Lily's downcast eyes, her silent agreement with her father. It wasn't about revenge, but about closure. Ethan booked Riverstone Hall with its chandeliers, terrace, and grand staircase, intended for his failed wedding. Now, this place was to be the arena for celebrating his triumph. He personally curated the guest list, including all the city's significant business leaders, and of course, Richard, Eleanor, and Lily Hartman. The embossed invitations were formal and left no room for ignoring. On the back, in modest print, it read, "Organized by Ethan Cole." Ben, seeing them, grinned. "You're not just a fleet, Ethan. You're an armada." The evening at Riverstone Hall was clear and crisp, as an October evening should be when the city is alive. The hall glowed from within, chandeliers casting warm light on the tall windows. Guests in expensive suits and elegant dresses glided across the marble floor with champagne flutes, their voices blending into a hum of success and influence. Ethan arrived early to personally ensure everything was ready for the guests. The staircase, where he once dreamed of seeing Lily in her wedding dress, now adorned with flowers, became the centerpiece of the evening. The terrace doors were open, letting in the fresh autumn air. Everything was exactly as he remembered, but now it was his evening, his world. He was the host. His team, moving through the crowd, introduced the company to potential partners, answering questions about the deal. Ethan shook hands, posed for photos, and engaged in polite conversation, but his gaze was fixed on the main entrance. The arrival of the Hartmans changed the atmosphere. Richard, in a dark gray suit probably worth more than most people's monthly salary, entered first. His stride was confident, but upon seeing Ethan, he froze for a moment. Eleanor followed him with a polite but tense expression. Last was Lily, almost unchanged in 10 years, though a certain sharpness had appeared in her features and a slight tension in her smile. Ethan walked towards them, each step measured. "Richard, Eleanor, Lily, I'm glad you could make it," Richard replied reservedly. "Frankly, we were surprised to see your name on the invitation." "I thought you might be," Ethan responded. "It's not every day one acquires a company that defined another's career." Something flashed in Richard's eyes, but he quickly composed himself. "Business changes hands all the time." "Yes," Ethan agreed, maintaining an even tone, "but some deals mean more than others." Eleanor tried to lighten the mood. "A beautiful event. Thank you for inviting us." "I wanted this evening to be memorable, especially for certain guests," Ethan replied. Lily finally spoke in a quiet voice. "You succeeded." Ethan met her gaze. "Yes, and I hope you found what you were looking for." She was the first to look away. Throughout the evening, Ethan made sure the Hartmans saw everything. A slideshow of the company's key milestones, his conversations with other executives who treated him with respect, his team's presentations on future plans. Every moment was a reminder that he was no longer the person they had once dismissed. Mid-evening, Ethan took the microphone, and silence fell over the hall. 10 years ago, he began, I stood in this very hall, awaiting the start of a new chapter in my life. But that chapter was never meant to begin. I was told I was a sinking ship, that I had no stability or value to build a decent future. Today, I stand here not to prove anyone wrong, but to show what can be achieved when you refuse to let someone else define your worth. Ethan didn't name the Hartmans, but the pauses in his speech were eloquent enough. He saw Richard clench his jaw, Eleanor fidget nervously in her seat, and Lily clasp her hands in her lap. The enthusiastic applause subsided, and I, descending from the stage, plunged into a sea of faces. People reached out to me, eager to shake my hand, express admiration, and inquire about future plans. The Hartman family lingered for another half hour, remaining silent. I repeatedly noticed Richard's intense gaze from the far corner of the room, but I couldn't decipher what lay behind it. Before leaving, Richard approached me. "You've built something impressive," he said in an even voice. "I was able to do it because I believed in myself, even when others doubted," I replied. He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a truth he had been unwilling to admit. Eleanor said a polite goodbye, and Lily, after a pause, approached me. I was wrong, she whispered, about you and about everything else. I looked at her, remembering the person I was when she left, the person who would have given anything for her to stay. But that person was no longer there. We all make our choices, I said, and I made mine. She held my gaze for a moment before turning away. As the doors closed behind them, I felt neither triumph nor a desire for revenge. On the contrary, I felt relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. This evening wasn't about humiliating them. It was about reclaiming the space where I had once been made to feel worthless and filling it with my own success. Amidst the music and laughter, Ben clapped me on the back. "You did it," he said. "I did," I replied, raising my glass to our fleet. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in years, I felt absolutely free. As the last guest departed Riverstone Hall and the staff began to clean up, I stepped onto the terrace. The lake, bathed in moonlight, lay before me in all its splendor, the very view I had once imagined after exchanging my vows. But this time, there was no heartbreak, no oppressive silence, only a quiet satisfaction from knowing that I had taken my destiny into my own hands. Ben joined me, hands in his pockets. "You know," he said, "I thought tonight would be a reckoning, but watching you, I didn't feel that. You just closed a door." He was right. In the years after Lily left, I had imagined this moment as a decisive blow in a battle I hadn't started. But now, standing here, I understood that it was no longer about them. It was about me, the person I had become through every sleepless night, every risk, every setback that hadn't broken me. Then my mother appeared, wrapping herself in her coat. "I'm proud of you, son," she said. "Not for this," she gestured to the sparkling ballroom, "but for getting up when it would have been easier to stay down." Her words were more precious than any praise of money and success. Grace had seen me broken, unemployed, heartbroken, humiliated, but she had never stopped believing that I could rise. Inside, the cleaning continued, the clinking of glasses and chairs audible. I looked at the reflection of the chandeliers, shimmering on the lake's surface, and reflected on the journey. Losing my job seemed like the end of everything. Losing Lily was an even deeper wound, but without these blows, I might never have fully realized my potential. The following week, news of the acquisition spread throughout the business world. Headlines boasted about Titansoft's expansion and my role in the process. Richard's name was mentioned only in passing. In every interview, I spoke of resilience, innovation, and the importance of surrounding oneself with people who believe in your vision. I never mentioned the Hartmans directly. This story no longer belonged to them. It had become mine. One day, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a short note written in Lily's handwriting. "I hope you're happy. I truly do." I held it for a while before putting it in a drawer. I had no desire to reply. Whatever had been between us, that chapter was closed, and I had no intention of rereading it. The enterprise continued to gain momentum, like a locomotive gathering speed. Innovative products were introduced, the team welcomed new talent, and horizons expanded to an international scale. However, despite the dizzying growth, I never lost sight of true values. Sunday family dinners with my mother remained an unshakable tradition. Visits to Ben's garage, where we could sit on the hood of a car engaging in unhurried conversations about life, remained an important part of my life. One day, during a humble kitchen dinner, Ben asked a thought-provoking question. "What's next? You've reached the top. Where now?" A pause followed, and I replied, "I keep building, not for anyone else's approval, but for myself." This answer was strikingly different from what might have been said many years ago. Before, success was measured by the eyes of others, especially those who doubted. Now, the criterion was an internal feeling, a sense of purpose with which each day began. The lesson wasn't about refuting others' doubts, but about proving to myself the ability to transform life's most difficult moments into a foundation for something more enduring. Looking back, I realized I had been fortunate in ways I hadn't seen at the time. The breakup with Lily spared me the prospect of tying my life to a family where external attributes were valued above loyalty. Losing my job stimulated the development of skills and resilience that might never have been needed under different circumstances. The humiliation I endured became fuel, burned to the last drop on the path to success. On the anniversary of the failed wedding, I found myself at Riverstone Hall again, but no longer as a participant in a celebration, but as a guest at a friend's wedding. For a moment, I lingered in the lobby, scanning the familiar white stone walls and sparkling chandeliers. This place no longer associated with loss. It had simply become another point on the city map that I had long reclaimed in my mind. Leaving Riverstone Hall, I thought about what I would tell my 10-year-old self, standing in that small apartment with a suit in the closet and a crumbling life. I would say, "You will not only survive, you will thrive. And one day you will return to the very place where you thought your life ended, and you will smile because it was only the beginning." Returning home that evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, stepped onto the balcony, and gazed at the city lights. I felt neither bitterness nor a desire for revenge. A peace reigned in my soul, born from the realization that there was nothing left to prove. True victory lay not in owning Richard's company or in being present at Riverstone Hall surrounded by influential people. It lay in creating a life that belonged solely to me, shaped by my choices, my hard work, and my resilience. Sometimes, the best answer to those who doubt is not words, but a life built against their expectations. This is my story. And if anyone has ever told you that you are not good enough, let this story remind you that your worth is not defined by others' opinions. You have the power to rise from the ashes, to soar above all expectations, and to create a life you will be proud of.